the RPG Maker General Podcast, or the rpgmgp, where good game design goes to die. Hello everyone, and welcome to the RPG Maker General Podcast, or the rpgmgp, your one-stop shop for everything RPG Maker. This is Marpix, aka Cody, and we got a nice cast today. With me, once again, is Firgof.
Hello.
Fresh from the dead, Sam Windsor.
Hey, it's me, Sam Windsor. What's up, guys? It's me.
And a very special guest, all the way from Tumblr, Pinkaboa, aka Liz.
Hi, Mom!
Not a whole lot of news this week. Seems to be typical with RPG Maker. Yanfly has a couple new things going on, such as the Yanfly Map Select skill. So now you aren't limited to just selecting items for use in the field, you can use skills as well. And I got a huge Golden Sun vibe from what I saw, because now that you have skills that can be used outside of battle, you have the ability to make utility skills where they can be used in battle for one purpose and then outside for another, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I have nothing to add other than yes, that is cool.
I don't even really know who Yanfly is.
Do any of us truly know who Yanfly is? Or do we just... He's a mystery to all of us.
Yes. In that case, we'll move on to the next one. So, Project Progress. So, Defeat the Darkness is going along. The final cutscene, I think I know exactly what I'm doing with it now. Because I have to balance what I would call the tone. You know, I don't want the last, plot development cutscene right before the ends to be too heavy, but it has to get its point across. So I found a way to inject some humor and keep it from being full-on Evangelion-level despair. And that's a plus for me. I'm really bad at making it not full of despair, so I'm glad that I've evolved to that point. How about you guys?
Well, I've just been sketching things out for Dim and looking at plugins for Blender so I can generate a cityscape and drawing things up in ZBrush and making music and sounds and writing things out in OneNote. Not much actual progress on the game, but lots of pre-production work.
And you have a Tumblr now, right?
Yeah. I just started up an official Tumblr 2 days ago.
Fantastic. I'll link that in the channel.
I learned how to make rock, paper, scissors in RPG Maker 2003, and that's about it.
So, would that be a player selects either rock, paper, scissors, and then you roll like a 33% chance for the opponent?
Yeah, it's something along the lines of that. I gotta pull it up again. It's just, since I'm trying to just familiarize myself with the program, that's what I've been doing. I followed one tutorial, but I didn't get it quite right, so I ended up asking my friend, and I'm like, that's it.
Yeah, don't worry, Grasshopper. One day your event foo will become strong.
Feel free to lean on me if you need to. I've been doing this for a very long time.
I've heard. Weren't you the one with the PS3, or not PS3, the PlayStation RPG makers?
No, though I am familiar with them. I did mess around with them. I actually rented a couple of them back when they came out. But no, I've just been in the scene since we were organized via WebRing.
Aww.
That would be me and Red Mage. We both have a lot of experience with the PlayStation RPG makers.
Ah.
Yeah, in fact, I'm the guy that has the web series in PS1 RPG Maker, Defeat the Darkness. Shameless plug.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Windsor, you working on anything game-related?
I'm sure my buddy Souls from the podcast has let you guys know, but he and I are working on making something special together. I'm doing the graphical assets. He's making a video game, and that's something that I've been working on in RPG Maker.
Good job.
Awesome.
Thanks. Thank you.
Definitely an upgrade from last time we talked to you.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. I mean, I've been mostly focusing on my new profession lately, the oldest profession, if you will. Mm-hmm. Although with a modern twist, I'm cam whoring. I'm a cam whore now. But I just bought a nice new camera which has an attached microphone, so I'm going to sound a lot better on podcasts going forward.
Awesome.
It's good.
Yeah, so that's kind of an RPG Maker update in one sense.
Yeah. All right. So we'll cut through advice really quick. Back your shit up. Please, for the love of God. You have no reason not to. It's 2016, people.
Did a Dropbox.
Get Google Drive.
Yep, Google Drive's not bad. If you want to be pro, as I say every week, Tortoise Git.
Do what now?
If you want to go pro, then of course you want to go Tortoise Git or something else with Delta updates.
Tortoise Git.
Tortoise Git. I understand.
Yeah, it sounded mumbled there, like I didn't know what you were saying. It sounded like words, but I wasn't sure.
I see.
You know, like that song 99 Red Balloons? Like, I didn't even know it was German the first time I was listening to it. It just sounded like gibberish.
They have an English and a German version, although they're both mumbled.
Yeah. Right, and with that out of the way, let's move on to our main subject here, horror RPGs. You know, here in the month of March, we're thinking a lot about horror and spooky stuff. And, you know...
I mean, leprechauns are fucking terrifying.
You're telling me. So let me open this with, I have a limited amount of horror RPG experience. I have a friend, Lefoulet, who did a Let's Play of Eve, and that was most of my introduction to the horror genre in RPG Maker. And I also, a year or so back, Snow Owl, he had his game Skinwalker that just came out, and I played that, and I noticed a couple things that make it work in RPG Maker, and a couple that I think would be hard to overcome in the format. So you have a top-down 2D format, and there's a lot of, sprites that appear and disappear. There's a lot of fun with the lighting and how to creatively dim things and make things appear for a certain length of time. I think that since RPG Maker is not 3D, and because the camera is not near the player, it is harder to create suspense with RPG Maker than it is with what would be a traditional horror game such as Silent Hill. I think that I like the idea of map changes, where if you are on a map and you walk around it, you explore it, you know what it is, and then something spooky happens, you leave the map and you come back and it's changed and there's blood everywhere. Like, I think that's a really cool tool that can be used.
As long as it's not overused. We have a problem where there's like, man, you know what makes this spooky? Gallons of blood. just blood everywhere. Like, enter that room, you leave, boom, more blood. And they do that like 5 times over, and you're just like, it's not even a surprise. You just turn back and you're just like, what makes it spooky now? There's
Black and white full screen image of a woman screaming at the screen with messy hair, accompanied with woman screaming .og at full volume.
Yeah. You guys ever play those old Newgrounds games? It's like Where's Waldo, and it's just sits there for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then a woman just pops up and screams.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is how not to make a horror game. It's almost like those games knew how to make horror games and then did exactly the opposite. At the very least, they did get one thing right, even though it was also done wrong, in that it's suspense. A lot of horror is about suspense and letting the player's mind create the horror.
I would definitely agree with that.
Another thing I'd say about letting my mind create a horror.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't need you to find it funny. I do things purely for my own amusement. You guys can go die for all I care. Anyway, let's talk about RPG Maker. I just watched something called This House Has People in It, and that was really scary. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
I don't know, man. I could talk about like Hellraiser for a bit if you want. That's a scary film.
Sure.
Quite scary.
Cool. I'm going to talk about Hellraiser for a little bit on the RPG Maker podcast.
Sure. Tell us what's scary about Hellraiser.
Something that's great about Hellraiser. To preface this, my 2 favorite horror films are Hellraiser and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And something that these films have in common that isn't immediately obvious is a lot of the horror in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is built around taking situations that would be kind of funny, but they're so twisted and like grotesque that you couldn't possibly find them funny. And the fact that there's this kind of like humorous element to them in a way makes it even more twisted. It's like you're taking something like humor, like laughter, which is a fun thing, and you're corrupting it in a way, and that makes it all the more disturbing. Like the confliction of feelings adds to the feelings of unease. Hellraiser does the same thing, except it uses a lot of imagery that's intentionally kind of sexy. Like, it's supposed to make you feel funny things in your pants, but then you feel weird about the fact that you're feeling weird about that. And it creates an atmosphere that's, like, really uncomfortable. Like, I felt uneasy for days after the first time I saw Hellraiser, because, like, I'd try and jack off and I felt weird about it, because I couldn't stop thinking about, like, the scary things in the film. And, like, basically, they just used a lot of directorial techniques that you would find in things like pornography. So your brain's thinking, I recognize this. This is supposed to get my dick hard. But then, on a more rational level, you're going, but this is awful. This is horrible, and I hate seeing this. And I think if someone were able to recreate that effect within a video game, like an RPG Maker game or any other kind, I think that would be a memorably disturbing horror game.
Yeah, when I think about it, the RPG Maker community doesn't always... Some days they try to go for really intense gore, and since the art is just pixel art, it comes off looking funny rather than it does terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just thinking with the game Misao, that one was half intentionally funny, half disturbing, but it was really more all funny than it was any sort of disturbing.
Yeah.
It was, it's technically not an RPG Maker game, it's Wolf Editor, but all throughout that, every time something explodes into a shower of blood, or any time that there's, like, someone's limb gets chopped off, it's just this blob of red rather than an actual, like, detailed pixel art kind of blood type.
Yeah.
Oh, it just looks really cheesy.
The zero effort blob of red, where, hey, that's blood, you should be scared now, kind of thing.
I mean, I would say an RPG Maker game that does kind of do a pretty good job of what I'm describing is, there was this game made in the RPG Maker engine last year. It's an RPG called Lisa.
Oh.
And, oh yeah, you've heard of it. Cool. I don't know if any of the others have, but Lisa's a very good game. And, like, it's gross, it's creepy, it's frightening. But one of the points that really springs to mind as a bit that was really unsettling is the McDonald's bit, where you go to McDonald's and you bump into a guy in McDonald's, like, mascot uniform, and it's funny, it's weird, like, why is this here? And then he starts going, please let me die, and then he starts, like, bursting out of the suit, and it's like the game has, like, betrayed you while your guard's down. You're like, it's a moment of levity. And when you're, you're trying to feel the good feels because of the funny silliness, then the game kind of jumps, it turns on you. It plays a little trick on you. It toys with your emotions.
Entry in the Lisa series or the third entry in the Lisa series?
Second, Painful.
Ah. Yeah.
I guess a more literal example of what I'm talking about happens in the first game, where you're in the nice area and everything's all like sunshine and flowers and shit, and you talk to your dad and he makes a sweet little noise. He goes "ee," and then when you enter the Silent Hill version of that area, basically he's all horrible looking and he makes the same sound, but the sound effects slowed down, so it sounds like "Rah!" And I don't know, I'm kind of harping on this point a lot, but I think that what's the word? Taking pleasant imagery and twisting it so that it becomes negative. That's something I'm very fond of.
Yeah.
The juxtaposition of those two image types of things together.
Yep.
Yeah, like yeah.
It seems like there is a very clear connection between humor and horror, because both play off of your expectations. And when they do something that's unexpected, sometimes it can be a joke, but if you expect something and you expect it to be humorous and then it takes a sharp left turn into Horrorville, then it becomes truly horrifying because your perspective was challenged in that regard, I believe. Like if someone explodes into blood, great. But as Windsor was saying, you have these times where, things are supposed to be sexy, but they're horrifying. Now, if you have a horror movie where someone explodes into blood, it's kind of boring. But if you have two people having sex, that's supposed to be erotic, and then the girl's on top, her head falls off and starts gushing blood over the guy's chest. Now, that would be kind of disturbing.
That'd be kind of hilarious, actually.
I think Event Horizon had a really good run on that, actually. They had some really disturbing scenes in there. If you're a fan of Hellraiser, I would recommend that you watch it at some point.
I love Event Horizon. I do.
I think, coming back to RPG Maker games and gore and all that, less is more. And I don't necessarily mean, like, less gore if you have to show a gory environment. I mean, like, don't show it in detail or don't show the full thing of it. I think if you want to look for inspiration on how to show gore in a low-resolution game, I think Lone Survivor really nailed it by suggesting gore, but never really showing it in any detail, because everything was so ridiculously large and pixel that you couldn't ever really get a full sense of what was going on there. So your mind just fills in the gaps.
It's still one of those things where you use, you're just not seeing the full scale of it. You leave a lot to the viewer's imagination.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of that in horror. I mean, we obscure things, we hint by, like, showing something that's normal and then twisting it, like you have this perfectly lit hallway except for this one light which is turning on and off. Things that you would see in real life that make you go, no, that shouldn't be doing that. And also suggesting things, but not directly showing them. Sounds, ambience is always very important.
In the Yuminiki fangame.flow, I remember there's an event you can access through the sewer. And it's a room, or you go through the sewer, click on something, you go into a room that is all white or it's supposed to be all white, but it's mostly covered in blood originating from the door at the end of the room. When you try to click on that door, the protagonist starts having a breakdown, and, like, the screen goes fuzzy, and the protagonist, turns back to the viewer, and, like, blood starts coming out of their face and hands. And then you wake up from the dream. And it's one of those things where you never find out what's behind the door, but it's potent in the fact that you're just from, gee, what the hell created all this blood? Why is this even here? The mystery of why this thing is even in this place is just creepy in its own right.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like the Yume Nikki girl had a bad time. Shoutouts to Homestuck. No, I mean Undertale. Shit. You guys hear Homestuck's ending?
It's been ending for about 3 years now.
No, and he's announced the final date. There are 125 more pages of the comic, plus the final update, and then the final act. The entirety of Act 7, the final act, is going up on the 13th of April this year.
Presuming
I'm all the way back in, man. See, because I was so into Homestuck, and I realized since it's ending, I'm never going to have another opportunity to be all the way into Homestuck. And I was never all the way into anything the way I was all the way into Homestuck. So I'm going to spend the next, 3 weeks being fucking complete Homestuck garbage. I'm wearing a Roxy shirt right now, and nothing else, man. I changed my icon on every website. I changed it on this to Muffet from Undertale. But that's a different thing. But on Twitter, I'm Roxy. On my Tumblr account, I'm Roxy. I like Roxy, man. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the sleuts, of the horror RPG Maker games, if you will.
So glad. going back to horror for a second, I agree that the viewer's imagination is the best way to handle things, especially when you have a low pixel count or if you use a lot of shadows. You know, if you see a monster going after a man, but it's not them, it's bad lighting, so it's a silhouette, or it's their shadows on a wall. I think that is much more powerful than just showing it, because by showing it, you allow it to become mundane. Upon repeated viewings, a person can understand what's going on, and then they can normalize themselves to it. But by leaving it up to the viewer's imagination, it could change every time they watch the movie or play the game.
It's a lot like being a stage musician, stage magician. And that you always show the trick, but never let people figure out what the trick is.
Exactly.
It's a little bit like being a professional wrestler, in that you do the cool moves, and there's always a secret as to how you're able to do the cool moves without hurting your man. But you never let anyone know, because they don't need to know.
I think that's a good metaphor for putting the player in danger, actually, wrestling. And that you're always pulling your punches. You're always going to suggest them, like, I'm going to punch you in the friggin' face if you don't get away from that door. You're not actually going to do it, but you want them to feel like it's going to happen.
Okay, that's good. That's a good little analogy.
There are some times where it's better if you do at least punch, like, at least you injure their arm. So, like, the result of not completing X has impact on Y. Where
There'll
you're
always be a question as to whether something will or won't have a consequence if it could be injury.
Yeah, and the anticipation and fear of that is, like, did I make the right choice? Did I choose the right door? That's something that also adds to the horror experience.
Yeah, because you have to set up the expectations for the player. If you look at, say, Star Wars, all right, stormtroopers have terrible accuracy. They hit probably one target every film. But the characters take stormtroopers seriously, and you're expected to take stormtroopers seriously because in the beginning of nearly every movie, they have the stormtroopers doing something badass or doing something that requires a lot of skill. So they try and establish early on that, hey, stormtroopers are not to be fucked with, and then they spend the rest of the movie hoping that you still fear for the main character's safety because they're getting shot at by a bunch of stormtroopers.
Yep. And there are a number of ways you can go about establishing that sort of threat. Usually what people will do is they'll set up a patsy. Like, the entire opening of Star Wars Episode 4 is patsies. You just see these no-name characters who are part of the Rebel Alliance just getting mowed down by stormtroopers. So that establishes that, they are a threat. But then never actually puts the cast in danger. Even though people that aren't the cast are just getting slaughtered.
It's a
And you can do that in horror games by, like, killing off some guy that walks into this room and he just gets smashed out of nowhere. And then the game leaves you to walk across the room if you want to.
Well, there you go. At the same time, I think that there's a lot of horror stuff that's already... If you play one RPG horror game, you play one or two of these things, and you're like, I know what's coming, I know. And then it comes, and you're just like, I called it. A lot of the stuff is used over and over again, whether it's like flickering lights, or, oh, you got to complete this puzzle, and then, boof, a monster pops out. And it's one of those things where, sure, you can use something that's traditionally scary, whether it's blood on a windowsill or flickering lights or whatnot. But it doesn't mean that the audience, since the audience has seen the scary thing before, it doesn't mean that the audience will be scared of it.
Right, they've seen that stage trick. They know how it works.
Yeah. So, Liz, I have a question for you. Would you blame the dirge of samey RPG Maker horror games on the young amateur developer base, or would you blame it on what I blame it on, where there's not quite enough tools to make a lot of diverse horror games that can appeal to people in their own way?
I'd blame it on both. It is a thing with the tools you're given, even if you use the default graphics, in any of the RPG makers, you could theoretically make a decent horror game. It's again more about atmosphere. You can play around with lighting. You don't have to be a graphical wizard to still make a horror game. You just have to know how to set up an atmosphere. But certainly to not have those resources for a greater variety of horror games, yeah, we don't. That would be really nice if we had more resources for that. Whether it's sci-fi horror or more modern-day horror stuff. If we keep using the same resources again and again, of course we're going to have a lot of the same horror stuff. And the other one I would blame on the amount of younger people in the user base, because they just don't know what it has already been done. And even if they know what's already been done, they might say, as long as I do this, this, and this, it'll qualify as horror. But they won't use them in the correct... They might not take a new approach to them, and they might not execute it well.
Yeah. I feel that there's a lot of the Me Too-ism going around these days. It's not as bad in RPG Maker, but let's talk about another community real quick. The whole Five Nights area is very, very Me Too. There are a couple of standouts that are actually pretty good games, where people obviously actually deconstructed the games, figured out how they worked, changed them, and then put it back together in a new way. But
can you name any? Because I'm actually interested in that.
Sure, I'll bring them up later. But yeah, it's kind of people know as novices what's successful, and so they try to emulate them. But in emulating them, they don't really bring anything new to the table. They set their bar for success as successfully emulating them.
There's also the thing where a lot of the RPG horror community has just played a certain canon of games. It would be like Eve, The Witch's House, Misao, anything VG person translated. And so unless you, if they don't go further into the RPG Maker horror stuff, and they don't take inspiration from more Western games like Off, or games that just use a different flavor of horror, then you're not going to have any variety in that sense.
Yeah, I also think that when you're first starting as a creator in any field, be it music, be it writing, what have you, you generally tend to make what I would call fan fiction, because you're taking you're taking everything you've seen, and because your scope of experience is so small, you're heavily borrowing from what little you have to take from. Now, if you have someone who has spent their entire life growing up watching plays and going to see musicals, and then they suddenly want to make a horror game, you damn well bet there's going to be a song in there somewhere, and it might be a very spooky song.
Is that where Mogeko came from?
Spooky, scary skeletons.
And that boils down to being creative and drawing from multiple resources. The more outside experience you have, and the more content you can take from, then the better you can make whatever you put your mind to.
Yeah. Just thinking with all these rip-offs, I'd like to see when the Undertale stuff is going to be, there's going to be more Undertale ripping off on Steam. At least it'd be a nice change.
Yeah. Some of it's probably going to be really good. Just wait until people point out the really, really good ones and track those ones down. That's what I'm thinking, man. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with lots and lots of people copying a game that was pretty good. It's better than if everybody was copying fucking a game that I don't like Pokemon. I thought of it. It took me a second. I was trying to think, what can I say that will antagonize the maximum number of people?
Every podcast.
Son of a bitch.
Every podcast.
It's tried and it's tested. It works.
I'm sitting on my bed right now, and I have at least 2 or 3 Pokemon plushies in it, so...
There are a couple of communities and metaverses that I really want fan games to come out of. They're really nice. In fact, Dim came from me being tired of waiting for a good game to come out of that fan base.
Woo!
See, for me, I wish more games wholesale ripped off Super Smash Bros. Because every game that rips it off a little bit tries to change it just enough that it's not an obvious rip-off, and they end up removing all the elements that make it what it is. Because, like, hit directions and knockback and directional attacks in the air and percentage-based damage rather than health-based damage are all things I would say are vital to Super Smash Brothers. Like, you couldn't make a Smash Brothers game if you took away one of those things. And every other game that people make that's based on Smash Brothers takes away a couple of those things, just so it's not exactly like Smash Brothers, and it makes the game much worse. Like, it always blows me away that things like damage moves and kill moves being two separate moves are not even a thing in like any game other than Smash Brothers. Like, that's the most vital part of Smash to me, is the fact that you rack up damage and then you knock them off the stage and you got to keep them off the stage, and that's how they lose. And I can't think of a single other game that does that. And I would really like a game that unabashedly goes, okay, we're doing the Smash Brothers thing. It's another game that's like Smash Brothers, except we've improved it in a couple of ways, but it has the same core gameplay. Like, I want there to be thousands of games like that, because a couple of them would be great.
Well, you already have one. It's been around for about 50 years. It's called NFL Football. As I was learning to take Smash on a competitive level seriously, I thought of percentage as yards and actually killing people as touchdowns. So, you know, in a football sense, you can get as many yards as you want. You know, you can keep marching down the field, but if you keep getting held back and you can't score points, then none of those yards matter. Whereas if you are a really shitty team, but you can pull a couple trick plays and get touchdowns, then you're going to win the game, even if it's through an odd gimmick that people will find out quickly.
Just thinking now, just the odd gimmick that people will figure out quickly. Just those two Pac-Mans just bouncing on each other. That'll certainly. Yeah.
Waka waka waka. Oh, you're talking about that glitch in the 2v2s where two allied Pac-Men can just keep using each other's trampoline to reach, like, infinite height?
And for that, they learn how to fly.
Oh, that's
Smash Bros. Is great. I want more Zelda rip-off games as well. Like, not nearly enough games completely rip off the 3D Zeldas. Like, I wish there was so many more games with that exact, like, structure.
I was wondering about that, because I know at least one or two good 2D Zelda rip-offs, so I was wondering.
Yeah. Like, Anodyne is one of my favourite RPG Maker games, and that's basically just a Zelda game.
Is it really an RPG Maker game? I don't think it was made on the system.
No, it is. It's probably, like, one of my favourite demonstrations of what is possible to do within RPG Maker. Because, like, that and Lisa... Yeah, it's great. It's a really... I think it's a super underrated game.
Absolutely. Let's see. On the topic of horror again, it is interesting to see the various different types of horror come up and how they use it to scare... how they each utilize their horrorness to scare people.
Yeah.
Are you talking like a psychological versus gore or something?
I usually draw the distinction between the two as horrors and thrillers. I mean,
yeah,
there's a large difference to me between Tokyo Gore Police and Poltergeist.
And there's a difference between games like Eve and games like The Witch's House.
Yes.
They're both puzzle games, but Eve relies on the players getting invested into the characters and invested in the danger that it presents them, while the Witch's House is more of a puzzle game with jump scares in it. It's still fun. It's a well-paced puzzle game, but it's not as much horror as it is. Poop. Just out comes the skull, like the Kool-Aid Man. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think the difference between horror and thriller with the jump scares. I think I may have said this a little bit earlier, but it's about how numb you can get to it and how quickly. So a puzzle game with jump scare elements, oh, you know the guy's going to jump out after the second or third playthrough. and then you're done being scared by it. Like, it had its day. But you go into actual horror that is similar to the humor, kind of goes against your expectations, that can linger with you afterwards. And when you go back to the game, you still have those questions and you still have that doubt lingering in your head.
I'd say Off is a good game for that.
I think the game that does the best for atmospheric horror, albeit it had a terrible translation, absolutely terrible translation. Even the version that came out recently, which was approved by the developers, still isn't that great. But Pathologic. If you can stomach playing a game for
I look that up.
18 to 20 hours, where your fastest speed is a brisk walk.
Oh, it's that Russian game, yeah.
Yes, where you're trying to stop a plague going through a city. I think that really nails the atmospheric horror as the city slowly becomes this terrifying madhouse of people.
In that regard, I would consider Spec Ops: The Line a horror game, because it's that shooter that came out a couple years ago where you bomb the civilians and your guy feels really bad about it. But
oh yeah,
yeah. And what really got me to get into that game and basically play through it 8 hours straight and walk out with PTSD for like a week is how the main character, Walker, he changes over the course of the game. So when you start playing, you're killing dudes, and when you get hurt, you have the red thing flash up on screen, not a big deal. But as you keep going into the city, and your characters are getting more and more tired, they haven't been sleeping, because that's the game, this is just a one-day deal, as they're going through the city in one day. They get more tired, they get more stressed, they're arguing with each other. So at the beginning of the game, your executions, you step on a guy's neck and shoot him in the head, you move on to the next guy. Halfway through the game, you get shot, Walker says, ow. The main character feels pain. When you're at the end of this game, people are shooting you, Walker will go, you motherfucker! And, you can hear how tired and pissed off he is. And when you're taking people down, instead of saying tango down, he will say, gotcha, motherfucker. And when he does the executions, they're no longer simple affairs where he quickly and eloquently takes people out and moves on. He is shoving the shotgun down their throat, and they're wiggling and screaming for help. And no matter how many times I go back to that game, I am still amazed at how much that gets to me.
That's very good, set it up as a shooter and then subvert the expectations of the shooter. It's a good deconstruction. Mm-hmm. And it is a good horror. Or it is, at least has horror elements to it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good attempt, yeah.
I'm thinking just a game that has, it sets itself up as one thing, and then by the end it's another. It didn't do it as well, but it did have an effect, is Wada no Hara in the Great Blue Sea. And it's a game where first you're just like, oh, you're on this RPG quest and full of cute characters to run around, and you gotta fortify the shield by securing all 6 dungeons, and by the end of that, when you get that done, 2 kingdoms are about to go to war, but then they realize, wait, there was, the reasons for going to war were falsified. There was a letter that someone allegedly sent someone else, and they were like, I never sent that letter. You didn't? And then suddenly the real bad guys come, and then it just starts getting into this Red Sea area, which is full of, instead of the regular pixel art style Mogeko was using, they start making painted backgrounds and, manipulating photos with eyes in it, and your characters walk around in that.
Oh, good heavens. That's very Wizard of Oz, where the movie starts black and white and then it goes to color.
It's in the last third of the game, so you already have time to adjust to oh man, these are some nice, cute characters, and then it springs it on you, and you're just like, well, shit. There's also an effective dream sequence within that area where you think things have gone back to normal. Wada no Hara and her team are just like, Oh man, we're back at home. Oh gee, it sure is a nice day outside. But then you go outside, the sea is still red, no one's out. I can't remember if no one's out or if anyone's out, they're just like extremely creepy monotone type of things. Not literally, it's a non-voice game. But their way of talking is static. You go back inside, you look in a mirror, you see yourself like slowly, I think you see yourself slowly deteriorate. And it's just like, Watanohara's like, everything's fine. And then it goes back to, it segues into another dream that's actually like reasonable, but you get the sense as a dream, and still it's one of those terrible fake outs that you're just like, ugh.
Ah.
Brings me to mind of another thing that I find kind of missed a lot in RPG horror games I'd like to see more often. I don't think people get sometimes that part of what we want to see as an audience is either for the protagonist to fall or fail.
Yeah.
And that the whole story is almost an exercise to get them to be challenged and fall and fail. And even if they do succeed, it won't be the success that they wanted. Or even if they fail, then maybe the world will still go on anyway. And ultimately their thing had no meaning, or etc. It's not about, the world was saved and so on and so forth. It's usually about the world was saved, asterisk.
Yeah.
That's a very Twilight Zone way to go about it. Based like the 1950s, 1960s TV series, it really introduced what I think would be a lot of the more psychological aspects of horror. So, for example, there was an episode I watched on the Sci-Fi Channel forever ago. It was one of my first episodes. These two guys in a rural town, they find an alien who crash-landed. And they're taking care of the alien. And the alien is thankful. And the alien starts writing something in a notebook, but he doesn't show the other two guys what it is. The rest of the town finds out that they're holding an alien, and because it's an alien, they want to get rid of it. Because they're scared of what they don't understand. Eventually, it boils down to they capture the alien, they burn it alive, and they burn the notebook. The two men that took care of the alien in the first place dive into the fire to get the notebook out, and all that's visible is the first paragraph talking about, "Thank you for your kindness. I have found the cure for your human disease, cancer." And
That's so terrible.
yeah.
Well, it's kind of meant to be that way, though. A
Yeah,
good
but
horror game
it's
is
a
where
good
you
kind
walk
of
away
terrible.
a changed man.
Yeah, anyone who watches that would have their perspective challenged at the very least. And I think, based on what you guys are saying, I'm not huge on horror, but it sounds like horror is in a unique place in our media atmosphere because the protagonist is allowed to die. They're allowed to fail. Most modern media, they want happy endings. They want positive stories. They want heroes. People walk into most films and they expect to walk out feeling good or excited or pumped up. But that's not the case with horror, is what I'm getting.
I mean, you can have a bittersweet ending that still is terrifying. I think Sayano Uda did a really good job of that. Yeah, it's happy and peaceful for everyone that's not the human race.
I'm just thinking, Lisa is a good game. The first Lisa really did the nice, the fuck you ending right. No matter how many times I've watched that game being played, because I never got the courage to do it myself, I always just feel like nauseous and depressed afterwards. It's something that it's actually when I think about it, video games are not like movies since the player has to put forth effort to get through them. So I can see why a lot of games want to give at least a happy ending for like, hey, you did all this work, you got through all these puzzles, here's your reward. And if you go through all these things and you go through all these puzzles and your reward is a shitty ending, that's something I think developers might think they want to avoid.
True. I think it has more impact if it's something like you're going through a game where you're dealing with all these terrible people. And whenever you're talking to them, whenever you're dealing with them, there's always a button on the screen which is just, shoot this man. And it's always there. You can choose never to press that button, but the game will have consequences if you ever do. I think that's a much more interesting narrative we can create with games, is this, you know that you shouldn't, but here's the option to.
Yeah.
I had a similar idea for an RPG a while back where you would have this really annoying helper character. And they would steal the show in every cutscene, and they'd have a really annoying voice, and they serve no purpose in the plot. But they gave you some kind of gameplay benefit. You could dismiss them at any time, and you'd never see them again, but you would lose out on that stat bonus or whatever the heck they gave you. So it would be up to the player whether or not they wanted to put up with this thing and how annoying it was, or if they wanted to go through the game and make it slightly harder for themselves, but do it the way they feel they would want to.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking through, and it's just like you either get tortured by a character or you. I'm sorry. I think that would work if both had benefits. You do set it up where there's, where there's both benefits, but unless that character, the annoying character, got some character development, I don't think anyone would still like it.
Well, the reason I thought of it is because it actually works really, really well in Valkyria Chronicles. It's a strategy game, and you get a cast of about 30 different characters with different classes that you can bring out to the field. You have your scouts, your snipers, your machine gunners, all this. And some of them are really cool, like, they're happy to help and do all this stuff, and some are friends with other ones. And then you have the snipers, and the male snipers are dicks. I don't like any of the male snipers, because there's two. And I started the game, they randomly assign you 2 snipers, and then you unlock the rest as the game goes on. And I got the 2 male snipers. So I got to choose between bringing the really annoying little kid with the high-pitched voice, and that's how he was supposed to be, is like if he misses a shot, he goes, "Come on, hit!" Or I pick the other male sniper who's a little bit older, but he's a dick. And every time you kill someone, he goes, "See what you get?" And so I had the option between annoying little child, annoying jerk, or no sniper at all, which was also not the optimal decision.
Yeah.
I think there was a great fridge horror moment that could have been seized on in Valkyria Chronicles that wasn't. And that there is a really powerful character you can get later in the game. If one of your one particular person dies, and it could be, that the game could be self-aware of that, and it knows that you specifically put that person in a situation that would die in order to get this character who's better, but who will forever hate you.
Ooh, that'd be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you imagine, the game chiding you for engineering their death?
Well, I mean, that is kind of your role, too, if you think about it. If you look at the situation of Valkyria Chronicles, is you're constantly being thrown into suicide missions. And most of the time you get out perfectly intact. But in a more realistic approach, it'd be, who am I sending to die today?
I think the first Fire Emblem did that, actually, because you would get sent on special guidance chapters if you had less than X amount of units, and you could recruit other more powerful units by letting certain other ones die. Oh, man.
There's a lot of opportunity for the consequences of the actions of the player to have more impact personally on them. I feel that it's hard to do. It really is hard to do, but it has more impact when the player has made a choice and is confronted for that choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if they're confronted in a way they didn't expect. So you have a Metal Gear Solid for PS1, and Psycho Mantis will read your memory card for other Konami games. Oh, so you like Spyro the Dragon, do you? No, it's not. What game was it?
It's Castlevania.
Castlevania.
That's the only.
Wow.
It's all Konami games, but the only Konami game anyone's played over here other than Metal Gear is Castlevania.
Yeah, and so Psycho Mantis asked you if you like Castlevania, and you're like, holy shit, I was not expecting that. And I think that kind of stuff is really cool. Or like in Chrono Trigger, how seemingly innocuous things that you did without thinking there'd be a consequence end up hurting you later when you go on trial.
Imagine a game where you're taken through, most of the time you play, say, a Call of Duty game. You'll be stuck in cutscenes, and you can't do anything during them. But you could totally subvert that. You could let the player at any time during this negotiation with these hostile terrorist leaders. Just pull out their gun and shoot everyone in the room, and then leave. And that would completely take the game's plot into another entire situation, because now you're the villain.
I'm just thinking about, like, that is a lot of effort, because you have to, like, all right, what would that possibly lead down to? At what point branch in the story could you do that? And if you could do that at multiple points in the story, how would each branch differ?
Mm-hmm. Or it could be like, the whole game the player is mostly powerless. But this one time, he's alone with one of the main villains in a room with a knife between him and that person. And you could just stab that person.
Could just stab the fuck out of them.
To address Metal Gear Solid again, they actually did that really, really well, because you can kill bosses early, but it doesn't change the overall plot. So it's not like you're making a decision early that forces you down a different road and you're basically making two games. Yeah. So you have the end. He's a sniper, he's the best sniper ever, but he's old and he's in a wheelchair, and he's waiting. He's literally waiting for you to fight him. That is his whole life, is just waiting to have his duel with you. And if you set the clock in your PS3 forward a couple years, he dies of old age, and the boss fight never occurs.
There's an even more nefarious way to take care of the end early as well, too. There's a scene early on where a bunch of the game's antagonists are meeting out on this dock, and you have full visual on them and controls at the moment. So you could just pull out your sniper rifle, shoot the end in the head, and run. And that kills him. He's gone from that point forward.
This is starting to get less horror and more into comedy again.
But I think it's more interesting if it's something like you have this childhood friend who's with you on this adventure, and at some point early in the story they get infected by this unknown black magic. And the more that they're in your party, the more you start getting random status afflictions. And at any point, you could just stop giving them medicine and let them die. But the game will know that you actively chose to let them die. And people could react to you accordingly from that.
Oh, now that is spooky.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's just you have to have good enough writing to, like, set that character up as someone you should care about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can just see how easily that could be bungled up. Like, man, I don't care about little Tommy Two Shoes.
This useless piece of chaff. That's like, I think it was Fable 3, where they kill your sister or your wife or something, but you literally never knew she existed until you booted up the game, so why are you supposed to care?
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do have to set these things up properly, especially if you're going to go for something like a betrayal.
Yeah. I think I handled it well in my web series Defeat the Darkness, because it went from being a stock betrayal because the plot demands it to, because you have characters in there who are breaking the fourth wall and causing trouble, you now have characters with legitimate reasons to betray the party.
Yeah.
It sounds like horror in general is very hard to do because it revolves a lot around novelty and a lot around magic. So you have to be the first one to do it, and you have to do it very, very well in a way that doesn't break immersion.
The execution and the presentation.
You don't have to invent a new trick, though. I mean, sure, everyone's used to the whole, I suddenly pulled a quarter from behind your ear. But if you suddenly pull somebody's eyeball from behind their ear...
Dude, that'd be pretty fucked up. You just watch it disappear from the back of their socket.
What?
So you can actually play. That was kind of my point there. Is that you can play with the existing tropes, and defy them or twist them in interesting ways. There are lots of ways to do it. You don't have to go whole hog and come up with a new magic trick, so to speak.
I was going to ask, did you guys want to talk about atmosphere?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very important to horror games. Very, very important and often neglected.
Yeah. So did you have something you wanted to start with, Liz?
It's interesting how you can create a horror atmosphere in RPG Maker games. you can still use the default graphics or graphical resources you get online, but as long as you play it's a lot more to do with sound and lighting than it is to do with scenery around you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be like, it's also going to have to do with, like, stuff you normally encounter. I'm thinking Ao Oni ain't the greatest game in the world, but it puts you in a place where you're mostly alone and with no music, except when the beast comes out and starts chasing you. And and the music is only like just like some scare chords on the piano just looped over and over.
Yeah.
But it's still scary because the contrast between no one being there and then suddenly poof, Oni, run the fuck away, music's coming. It's at least it does something.
Yeah, I think the clock tower model still has a lot of life in it. It's still hard to nail properly.
Yeah.
As the many failures of Clock Tower are there to attest. But people often neglect sound, or they think that it's important, and so they'll spend a little bit of time on it. But it's more important than just selecting a really neat and interesting BGS. It's got to be things like sometimes you walk by a door and there's knocking, or you just randomly play sounds occasionally matching to the area, not structured on a particular schedule, just I rolled 97 on my D100, so I play this sound now. It's the more predictable an environment is, the less horrifying it is. The more unknowns that there are, the more interesting it is.
Yeah, for my example about ambient sound, who here's played Amnesia: The Dark Descent?
I have.
All right. So I think Amnesia as a game is really boring and slow. I don't enjoy playing it, but what I do enjoy is not only the graphics. They have a good use of, like, I like the models, I like the textures, I like the shadows they use. It all looks good. It looks like a horror game. But the ambient sound is done ridiculously well. No matter where you are, you're always hearing something being pumped into your ears. Just it gives you that random ambient noise, so your ears are always perked up. They're always listening for something. You're always waiting for something to happen. But you don't actually see your first enemy until, I think, half an hour in. So it does an excellent job of building the tension and keeping you interested, even if there's nothing there.
Yeah, it'll also make sterile environments feel alive, like you'll have footsteps walking overhead, or the sounds of doors opening and closing very lightly in the background.
Yeah. Or even a bug, just a bug skittling across the floor, that brings atmosphere. You're spending precious brain resources trying to figure out what these sounds are and where they're coming from, and just waiting for that one unexpected noise to throw you off.
To go back to the magician metaphor, it's like that's where you can have the distraction to your magic trick.
Yes.
You can have the audience focus on that bug instead of the whatever the hell you have set up next.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yep, super important. If you're making a horror game right now, and you haven't thought about things like that, you should.
I also like to say with atmosphere, there is some. If you completely submerge the viewer in horror straight away, then it will become the normal.
Yes.
And instead of actually having that be the atmosphere, it's just like, oh, this is the game. This is how it's played. You have to ease into like the more terrible stuff or the more unexpected stuff rather than just whip it out as soon as you get there.
Oh, that brings me to an important thing that I always want people to know as well. So, chase music. Often it's okay, but I'd like to suggest something very different. I think that it's hard to force the player to feel like they're afraid. I think it's better for them to make themselves feel afraid. And so what I've done usually with my own little test games is whenever there's about to be an encounter, I will shut everything up. the game will go dead silent, except for you walking around, etc. And I think just the sounds of something coming after you is enough background music.
That is.
Yeah. Going off of what Pink was saying, I agree that you have to have kind of an arc with the rising and falling action, and I think that's where a lot of amateur devs fail. I hearken this back to when I worked in college radio. You had a lot of hardcore music, and the songs were about 2 minutes long, and they started full blast, people screaming, double bass drums, super loud, all the way through, from start to finish. There was no quiet moments, there were no slow moments, it was just a guy being very loud for 2-3 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
And these kids these days, anyway, they enjoy novelty a lot longer than adults do. They aren't as numb to it. And when you listen to radio, especially the modern pop stations that teenagers listen to, they will play their top hit song 2 to 3 times an hour, and that's how it's scheduled, because the teenagers will enjoy listening to a song that often. And so when they make a video game, they don't think that people are tired of blood and gore or tired of jump scares, because they still enjoy jump scares. They're still affected. And so they make the game based on how they feel about certain things, as opposed to what the general audience, where their preferences lie.
Yeah.
Oh, and it doesn't hurt to have the occasional moment of levity. It is a horror game. Don't make it into a comedy. But, I mean, a moment of comedy can really spice things up later into a game. Because if you make all of your downtimes just, solving puzzles or walking around, I mean, sure, those are falling action points, which makes spikes and chases more interesting. But just kind of jostle the player out of, apathy every so often. Throw them something unexpected, a joke, something that makes them laugh or think about something. Not like, oh God, something's coming after me, but, I didn't know Copernicus sailed the globe in a steamship.
There you go. I think the Witch's House didn't do enough of that for me. It did a good amount. It's just not enough for me.
Witch's House was pretty full throttle.
Yeah, balls to the walls. I'm just thinking. Misao is this beautiful horror comedy that is. It does start out as something normal at first, at least with the opening cutscene. But everything's just so fucking goofy. I love it.
Is it like Sharknado, where it's super silly, but everyone's playing it straight?
Almost. There are, I think after a little bit, with one of the more recent updates, the author does at least acknowledge that some things are silly. When, there's a scene where you hide, so this guy with a chainsaw kills another student on this operating table. You hide in a corpse or something, but this other student is the biggest bitch you know. She is one half of the reason why the ghost that's haunting this place, the ghost Misao, title, but she's half of the reason why that bitch is haunting this place. So watching her get wrecked is just you watch her get wrecked, and then the main character comes back out, and she's like, oh well. And in the first version, it was just oh well, and her expression didn't change because they didn't have multiple expressions. But you get to later versions, and then she's then she says it with stars in her eye and pointing to her face, that anime, that's just a cute look, oh, she died. Oh well.
Oh God.
Then there's this guy. After a touching scene, he used to be the main character, or the main ghost Misao's best friend, but then he ignored her when they were getting older for whatever reason. Anyways, he shares how he feels about Misao, and he's upset that he couldn't. And he's disappointed with himself, and he's like, I deserve my punishment. And, after he says this, for some reason, he's stuck in the middle of a road. I think his legs are cut off. But he shouts out, Misao! And of nowhere, a car just fucking runs him over.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
I won't hold Spooky's House of Jump Scares up as a master class in horror design, but I do want to point out that everyone laughs the first time that you get jump scared in that game. And I think that that's an excellent example for a moment of levity.
Now, is it intentional that you laugh?
Oh yes, they're incredibly cute cutouts that no one could possibly ever be afraid of. You laugh at yourself for being afraid at it.
Ah.
Later
What?
on, you see 5 people have died from it. Spontaneous heart attacks. I was like,
Oh, man. Going back to what you were saying, Firgof, you can really mess up the emotion of a scene by doing it wrong. Like the Adam Sandler movie.
You absolutely have to get the timing right.
Yeah, the Adam Sandler movie Click. We can all agree that Adam Sandler movies are very hit and miss. I saw Click in high school, and it was okay. I was enjoying the concept of the movie, like it started automatically fast.
Mishit.
Yeah. It was okay at the beginning, started, automatically fast forwarding through his life, and then there's a scene where it stops fast forwarding. He's in the hospital. He's conscious, and he's finally free of the remote for a brief second, and his ex-wife is walking out of the hospital that he's in, and then he chases her out in his gown in the driving rain. Her new husband looks over at him, and he is on the ground. He finally looks up, all weary, at the guy, and flips him off.
wow.
And then goes, no, you're okay, you're okay. Changes the hand to like a waving. And it's like, that was not funny. That was not needed. That is not what his emotions should be at. That was just juvenile.
Just the cheapest way to insert a laugh.
Yeah.
There's only a couple of locations in the game where you can kind of pull that off, just if you're doing a horror especially. But if you have the opportunity, I suggest it. It adds a lot of flavor to your game, and people will appreciate it. They'll call that scene out. They'll remember it.
Yeah. What I liked about the recent Batman Superman movie, apparently I'm one of the few people who liked it.
Not the only one.
Yeah. I thought it was great. I thought, I don't know much about Superman, but as a Batman fan, I was very pleased. They had, I can't count the number of jokes on it on my 2 hands. There were enough jokes to keep everything flowing smoothly and enjoyable, despite it being all grim and dark, and Batman and Superman have to have really bad days so they can feel sad enough to fight each other. Like, I really liked Lawrence Fishburne's character, the editor of the Daily Planet. No one cares about Clark Kent taking on the Batman.
There you go.
I feel I can understand why a lot of people didn't like that movie, because it didn't follow their expectations of what they expected the movie would be. And that's kind of also, circling back to horror, what it's all about. You got to set up those expectations if you want to make them have impact.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to have moments of levity, you got to kind of establish it early on. Otherwise, it'll just feel kind of weird and awkward.
Yeah, and forced.
You can do that in some surreal stuff, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's more forgivable if it's like, well, you're in a dream sequence.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, would you guys consider Middens a horror?
You'll have to remind me what that is.
Middens is the one that was developed by John Clowder / my former selves. It's about this this knight. Shit, I forgot what his name was. Anyways, doesn't matter. But it's about this knight he's in this realm where everything is let me just look it up. And I'll just show you through that. But he finds this gun, like he's a drifter, and he finds this gun, and the gun convinces him to run around and punish anyone who's done wrong within the new dimension he's in. It's a very distinctive art style. I don't know if you guys played it.
I have not played it, but the premise sounds, at the very least, psychological.
It's a very pretty... It is. You go into this world where not everything is quite... Since it's the leftovers of every other dimension, it's a garbage dump for, like, dimensional objects. Your dimension, like, got wrecked. The gun you find, that dimension got wrecked. and you're just the leftover articles of that. And as you traverse the area, you meet things that'll just attack you out of nowhere, or you'll meet things that are they're obviously bad. They'll be like, I eat kittens for breakfast or something. And you have the option to shoot basically anything and everything in that game. And if you pick a fight, for example, if you pick a fight with something that's that doesn't attack you, there will be moments in the battle where it'd be like, please don't, I have a wife and kids, before you shoot them. And the more evil and the more innocent fights you pick, the more they will attack you. Or like the more like the people who liked you the first time, they'll come back around and start attacking you the next time you go through.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Obviously, since I suggested something earlier, it's kind of like. Man, I also really like the idea of consequences that outlive your current game state. And I've always been a fan of that, and I was really happy that Undertale got some recognition for that idea. And I really want people to play with it more. Games like I'm Scared, stuff that kind of more directly interact with the player, or do not allow you to escape the consequences of your actions, I think is great stuff for horror games.
One Shot was an RPG maker that played with that where you had one chance to play the game, and then the computer would be like, you don't get to play this again. It's true. You save at certain locations, or if you click out the traditional X method, the main character fucking dies, and he's not on the title screen.
One Shot was the you trying to save the world from terrible plague, right?
It was the one where you play as this cat person, and you had this light bulb, and again, the cat person was in a different dimension than their home dimension. So, but I can link that too. It was the one made by Night Margin and Matthew VQ.
I swear that I just must be misremembering. I was thinking of an old Newgrounds game that does something similar.
Oh, yeah, that one is called You Only Live Once. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh yeah, the one where you try and rescue your girlfriend, but if you fuck it up, you just die. And the browser cookies save it.
Yes.
Yeah, the ultimate choice is sacrifice your daughter or sacrifice the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, You Only Live Once was really fun because it was the first popular experiment with that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And the game wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't supposed to be.
I guess, yeah, based on the premise, I'm a big nerd and I'm gonna save my girlfriend.
Also, we accidentally caused the thing that ends the world, but we're gonna fix it. Promise.
It's like a you suck towards the player.
It's kind of realistic, though. It's a nerdy guy.
Not in a bad way, but...
Yeah, it's a nerdy guy trying to save the world, and with how often anime makes those people superpowered, it's a breath of fresh air to be brought back to reality for just a second, just for one game.
Absolutely.
Like Deadpool. I like to bring up Deadpool as an example of things that needed to be said, but you shouldn't put in a classic film. For example, when he's trying to find out info about Francis. Wait, is it sexist to hit you? Is it sexist to not hit you? I don't know what's going on here. That's a fantastic joke for him to say, but if I were making, Schindler's List, I wouldn't find a place to put that joke in anywhere.
There's no place to put Schindler's List. Except maybe by, the Nazis? But that doesn't make sense either.
I needed a classic. That was the first thing that came in my head. I apologize.
God damn. And on that note, we end the podcast for fear of retribution. But no, I thought there were a lot of good solid beats in You Only Live Once. Like the fact that you have to walk to work every day. That establishes, that this is just some guy.
Wait, there's more than one day and You Only Live Once?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I didn't get past the first level. Like, I had 3 hearts, I fell into a pit, or I got killed by a lizard man. Like, I didn't make it very far.
Are we sure that we're talking about the same game?
You know what? I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, because I think I'm thinking about the same game you are talking about with the lizard pits.
I
and
do
not
not
the game
recall
you're
lizard
talking about with
pits.
the non-lizard pits.
One chance is what I'm thinking of. Sorry.
One chance. Okay.
Thinking of one chance.
All right, I gotta close this window before it records. Okay. This is what I'm thinking of.
This is
Oh, that is the game I'm thinking of. I just never got far either. Yeah.
I'm thinking of.
Ah. But again, like, you die and it's over.
Yeah. It saves whatever result that you make, and it's that forever. If you sacrifice the world to save your daughter, then every time that you boot up the game, it's just your daughter sitting on the park bench where you were sitting before you died.
Freaky. So I think we can all agree that the best way to make horror would be something that lingers with the player and makes them think.
At the very least, makes them think. I mean, it doesn't have to be cerebral. Horror doesn't have to be cerebral. It doesn't have to change the player, but it definitely has to provoke reactions. Horror is about feeling stuff, I would say, where most games are about winning.
Yeah, which puts it in a unique spot for sure. So are we ready to call this podcast?
Sure. Unless you guys have other stuff that you want to bring up.
Don't do drugs.
Sometimes it's good to play video games.
Oh God, it's been forever since you spoke up, Sam. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I forgot we were doing a podcast. I left my lube in my roommate's bathroom, so I had to go and get it. And I muted my mic while I left, so you couldn't hear me open the door. And then I forgot to unmute it, and then I was like reading articles.
Thank you for not increasing the horror in this horror podcast.
Oh man, I had so many good ones of those, but I didn't want to interrupt. Like, someone said there was a difference between a horror and a thriller, and I was like, I actually managed to blend the two because I'm both a horror and a thriller.
Oh my god!
I could have made this podcast so good if I was more willing to completely speak over you guys.
I would have allowed that.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to the RPG Maker General Podcast of the RPGMGP. This is Cody signing off.
This is me, Windsor, signing off.
This is
You don't need to sign off. You guys don't need to sign off. Just me and Cody.
It's fun. That's right. Thanks for having me on it.
You're most welcome. Please come back anytime.
Oh, sweet.
Pleasure to have you.